So a warm welcome to everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to AIOC 2021, the 79th virtual conference. I'm Himay, your hall coordinator, and I'd like to invite Dr. Mohan Shalini to please come forward and share her presentation, her screen, and she can start with her PPT. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Himay. And I am so thankful to AIOC, Dr. Partha, for giving me this opportunity to have this IC on ocular blood flow. And we have amazing speakers with us, and they all are doing ocular blood flows themselves. And I'm pretty sure they will be showing very wonderful slides and videos from where you can learn lots of things about ocular blood flow, which is actually an upcoming investigation in glaucoma armamentarium. And now because we are also having OCT angiography, that is also another modality which we need to learn and we need to understand. And I have wonderful speakers and panelists today. We have Professor J.C. Das with us, and we know he is teachers of teacher, has been mentor to so many of us. I welcome you, sir, Dr. Professor J.C. Das, sir. We have with us Dr. Kirti Singh, and she will be joining us very soon. And as we all know, she is heading glaucoma at the GNEC, and she has been trained at this Eye Hospital, London. And we welcome you, Dr. Kirti Singh. We have with us Dr. Mulli Ariga from Chennai, who is alumnus of SN Chennai, and he is glaucoma fellow. We are very well known to him, and he is such a wonderful and prolific speaker, and he has been a pioneer in ocular blood flow throughout our country. And we welcome you, sir, Dr. Mulli. And we have Dr. Minakshi Dhar with us. She was professor in HOD at Amrita Institute. Presently, she is at Center for Sight, New Delhi. And she has been a wonderful speaker throughout national and international levels. And today she will be sharing her experience of ocular blood flow. Besides that, we have Dr. Vinita from AIIMS Rishikesh, and she is also very versatile and a very wonderful speaker. She will be sharing her views on autoregulation. And then we have Dr. Vineet with us, who is a very young and dynamic surgeon. And good to for him that his wife is herself doing ocular blood flow. She is a radiologist, and both of them are doing wonderful job by giving this benefit to the patients. And also he is teaching lots of postgraduate students for past 7 years by making various groups. So we welcome you, Dr. Vineet. And with this, I would request Dr. J.C. Das, sir, to share his views and introduction about the topic, and then we will go on with the presentations. Dr. Professor J.C. Das, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shalini, for the excellent introduction.
Thank you, sir.
And to introduce the topic to the audience, we know that the vascular supply is one of the most important aspect of glaucoma. And the vascular theory is established a long time back. We are knowing much more about that now. And but I like to, from the outset, I like to point out that there is a difference between the perfusion pressure, ocular perfusion pressure, and the blood flow, ocular blood flow. And ocular blood flow is the final amount of blood which is reaching the optic nerve head or the retina. And the perfusion pressure is the difference of the pressures at the optic nerve head, which will pump more of the blood into the optic nerve circulation. But to give a definition to optic nerve, the optic perfusion, the ocular perfusion is the difference between the arterial and the venous flow. In short, that is the difference between the arterial pressure and the intraocular pressure, because the venous pressure and the intraocular pressure are the same. If I further dilute it, I can say that the perfusion pressure may systolic perfusion pressure or a diastolic perfusion pressure. Systolic perfusion pressure means the systolic blood pressure minus the intraocular pressure. Similarly, the diastolic blood perfusion pressure is the diastolic blood pressure and minus the intraocular pressure. Hence, the perfusion pressure, ocular perfusion pressure, can be decreased with the elevated of intraocular pressure or decrease in the blood pressure. That means the perfusion pressure is dependent on the intraocular pressure. If it is raised, the perfusion pressure will decrease, and it will also depend on the blood pressure. If the blood pressure is low because of any region, the perfusion pressure could also decrease. But perfusion pressure is just a small part of the whole blood circulation. The main important thing is the ocular blood flow, and there's a direct relationship between the ocular blood flow and the perfusion pressure. The ocular perfusion pressure is directly proportional to the ocular blood flow. What does it mean? That the ocular blood flow is equal to the ocular perfusion pressure divided the vascular dysregulation or vascular the autoregulatory mechanism. The autoregulatory mechanism is the finer tuning to allow the demanded blood circulation to the optic nerve head or to the retina. So this is extremely important controlling mechanism in blood circulation in the optic nerve head or into the retina. That means the changes in the ocular blood flow or ocular perfusion pressure is changed is via the blood pressure or the fluctuation in the intraocular pressure or the vascular resistance, which is finally coordinating or finally modifying the blood circulation. The ocular perfusion pressure is reduced if the systemic blood pressure is reduced or it is blood IOP is also reduced. This will be dependent on many more factors. The systemic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure, intraocular pressure is high or low, autoregulatory mechanism, and ocular blood flow, which is at the optic nerve head and in the retina. This is just one part of blood circulation. The second very important aspect, which finally matters, the amount of blood flow in the retina, quality of blood in the retina, and the amount of the oxygen reaching in the blood. Say, for example, a patient with gross hemoglobin level low, so the blood, the quality of blood reaching the target cells, the ganglion cells, and the supporting cells will be much less. So this is part which is reaching the blood circulation in the retina or in the ganglion cell level. At the same time, the target set should be healthy. That means ganglion cells and the supporting cells like astrocytes and oligodendrocytes, they should be healthy to take up the blood circulation which is reaching the oxygen concentration which is reaching them. So that it is a combination of blood circulation, combination of the quality of blood, and the combination of the health of the ganglion cells and the astrocytes and oligodendrocytes to take up the oxygen which is reaching them in normal quality. We have various methods to measure it. We have the color Doppler to measure the resistance index in the optic nerve head. We have the fluorescein angiogram. We have the scanning laser ophthalmoscope to measure the microcirculation in the optic nerve head. And you can also measure the blood flow. You can also measure the pulsatile blood circulation in the retina, and the retinal blood vessels analyzer. It also measures the autoregulatory mechanism, how much it is working, and the retinal oximeter to measure the oxygen concentration on the retinal vessels. But finally, when it comes to the patient, it is we don't have any means to actually see what is the health of the target cells to receive the amount of quality blood. So this is in general what I mentioned, but we have got the excellent speakers and will certainly enjoy their talks. Thank you very much, Shalini. Over to you.
Thank you so much, sir, for summarizing the topic so well. And with this, we will be starting with Dr. Vinita Gupta, and she will be talking about anatomical, physiological aspects with emphasis on autoregulation and vascular risk factors. Over to you, Dr. Vinita.
Thank you, Dr. Shalini. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this instruction course. Are my slides? Are my slides visible, please?
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
as since we have, it is important to understand, as Dr. Das sir has already introduced, that what is autoregulation and what are the various risk factors regarding this ocular blood flow which are happening in a patient with glaucoma. That's very important to understand the basic concepts before we actually start measuring them and start correcting those measures. My slide is not changing.
Ma'am, there is an arrow at the bottom. Just see if you can click. Moment you click, the slide has to change. Or you have the page up and yes.
Okay. So glaucoma, as we all broadly know, earlier was defined by elevated IOP, and IOP was given a lot of significance to it, a raised IOP. But now, over the years, it is no more solely defined. The progression of glaucoma or the disease changes which are happening in different types of glaucoma is no more solely defined by the presence of a raised IOP. An emerging question which has also come up is the well-controlled patient of glaucoma, who's said to be well-controlled based on IOP, is he actually well-controlled? So various studies have shown that patients progress despite a well-controlled IOP. So it is not only these mechanical risk factors of IOP and the thinning of the lamina tuberosa as well as the translaminar pressure changes, but it is a vascular risk factors which have come up in the recent times as more important for causing progression and changes in different types of glaucoma. And these are related to the blood pressure, as Dr. Das said, mainly related to the ocular perfusion pressure, which have an autonomic dysregulation, as well as other vascular conditions, comorbidities occurring in the patients of glaucoma, which are responsible for causing this dysregulation. The World Glaucoma Association, in its 6th consensus publication on ocular blood flow in glaucoma, has come up and said that the low ocular pressure has been identified as an independent risk factor for glaucoma progression, suggesting that in patients with POG, there is an alteration in the factors which are related to this ocular blood flow, and also there is a breakdown of this autoregulation. So to understand this, it is important to understand that the blood vascular supply of the eye is basically coming from two separate systems. Both of these are arising from the ophthalmic artery, which is a branch of the internal carotid artery. And we have the two circulations, the retinal circulation, just of the central retinal artery, and the posterior ciliary vessels, both the long and short posterior ciliary vessels, as well as the anterior ciliary vessels. So in nutshell, if I say it is a central retinal artery, which is supplying your inner tooth to the retina, which is accounting by the 5% of the ocular blood flow. And it is a posterior ciliary vessels, which are supplying your optic nerve head and the choroidal blood flow, which is responsible for 85% of your ocular blood flow. So certain other important aspects of this circulation, which you're supposed to know, is the choroidal blood flow is a very high flow circulation at the rate of almost 800 to 2000 ml per minute per 100 gram of tissue is the delivery of is the rate of delivery. As compared to in the retinal circulation, it is only at the rate of 50 to 80 ml per minute. And what relevance does this have is that since retinal blood flow supplies inner tooth to the retina, there may be slight variation in the temporal and the nasal region, because the temporal region obviously has more higher metabolic rate. But the choroidal blood flow, which has such a high flow rate, the importance is that it tends to maintain the ocular temperature of your ocular tissues at all times equivalent to your body temperature, irrespective of the changes in the environmental temperature. Thereby, it protects the retinal tissue from any thermal damage, and at the same time, it gives an efficient delivery of oxygen and glucose to the retina. As regards to the optic nerve, we all know it is mainly supplied by the circle of Zinehler and the pile vessels, which are again branches of the ciliary vessels. Only a small contribution is coming from the central retinal artery near the optic nerve head. Different terms which we use when we're talking about ocular blood flow is the ocular perfusion pressure, which is the most important determinant of the ocular blood flow and is directly proportional to it. The pulsatile ocular blood flow, which is an indirect measure of the choroidal blood flow, and the arteriovenous passage time, which is the time taken for the blood to flow from the retinal arteries to the retinal veins. Now, in order to understand, first of all, we should know that ocular perfusion pressure, as I have already told, is a determinant of ocular blood flow. And it is a delicate balance between the intraocular pressure and the blood pressures. So it has two components, the systolic perfusion pressure and the diastolic perfusion pressure. And it is important at all times, it should remain, the ocular perfusion pressure must remain above a certain minimum level. Because if it is abnormally low, it will cause a low ocular blood flow, and this result in the ischemic damage to the optic nerve head and the retinal tissues. How do we calculate this? Obviously, as Sir has said, it is 2/3 of the mean arterial blood pressure minus the intraocular pressure. So whenever there is a low perfusion pressure, whenever there is a low arterial pressure or there's a high intraocular pressure, it will cause a decrease in the ocular perfusion pressure. But how is this controlled in our eye? So how does this circulation controlled? Because what will happen when we have different metabolic requirements, when there's a relatively low flow, there will be changes in the perfusion pressure. But these changes should not affect your retinal and optic nerve head perfusion. So at all times, ocular perfusion pressure should be maintained. And this is achieved by the process of autoregulation, so that even if there is change in the intraocular pressure, there is a decrease in the decrease in the arterial pressure, or increase in arterial pressure, provided the resistance of the vascular tissues is unchanged, it should not cause significant ischemia to the ocular tissues. So what will happen because of this autoregulation, when the perfusion pressure is low, or there is an increase in the IOP, or when the oxygen levels are low, there will be vasodilatation, thereby increasing the blood flow. And when the oxygen level is high, there will be vasoconstriction, thereby reducing the blood flow. So autoregulation thereby maintains a constant nutrient supply in response to changes in the ocular perfusion pressure. And since we have two different vascular systems, this mechanism of autoregulation is also complex. We should understand that retina and the optic nerve head vessels both do not have any neuronal innervation and are mainly controlled, have mainly autoregulation achieved by local mechanisms, while choroidal vessels have an autonomic regulation as well. Also, it is important to understand that retinal choroidal arterioles do not possess any sphincters. So blood flow here is entirely a function of the muscular tone of the arterioles and the surrounding pericytes. And this is controlled by obviously myogenic, metabolic, neurogenic, and humoral factors. The myogenic factors, what do they do? So whenever there is a decrease in the perfusion pressure, there will be vascular dilatation, and the reverse would happen in the reverse circumstances. Similarly, whenever there are changes in lactic acid, in the partial pressure of oxygen, in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, so with a low oxygen and a high carbon dioxide tensions, there will be vascular dilatation, and the reverse would happen in the reverse circumstances. While a light stimuli, which cause an increase in the retinal metabolism, thereby again leading to increase in the capillary dilatation and increasing the blood flow. And all these changes are mediated by release of certain endothelins, release of certain biochemical substances, which are prostacyclin and nitric oxide. Endothelin also has a small role to play, but the major evidence in the studies which has come up is the role of nitric oxide in this autoregulation, especially of the optic nerve head perfusion. In general, as obviously there is a good autoregulatory mechanism in the optic nerve head and the retinal circulation, but this is very, very limited in the choroidal circulation. So whenever there is a autoregulatory mechanisms are not working, therefore in those cases, whenever there is a partial pressure, oxygen drops or the IOP rises, the choroidal circulation and perfusion will reduce. But this is largely compensated because of the high blood flow and the oxygen supply of the choroidal tissues. Out of these metabolic and the myogenic factors, it is the myogenic autoregulation which is the lesser impact as compared to metabolic autoregulation. But what happens in a patient of glaucoma? There is a markedly impaired autoregulation. And as a result of which, there is an ischemia. And here the changes in the ocular pressure, not only the reduced ocular pressure, but also fluctuations are there, which are more important. Various studies have documented, and these studies are from varied across the world, from various populations. They have all found that reduced intraocular pressure is an important risk factor for development of glaucoma. And color Doppler imaging has demonstrated there's a decreased blood velocities are seen in the patients of glaucoma, in the posterior ciliary arteries, in the central retinal arteries, along with the increase in the resistive index of these arteries. Also, there are various other risk factors which are seen in association with patients with glaucoma. And again, they are also found to have an association with abnormal ocular blood flow. And these include systemic hypertension, diabetes, aging, migraine, and besides even obstructive sleep apnea. Almost 47% of glaucoma patients suffer from systemic hypertension. And what does it cause? Two more slides. And therefore, presence of systemic hypertension has been identified as an independent risk factor for glaucoma progression. Similarly, around 35% of POG patients have diabetes, which again causes a disturbance of autoregulation of the retina and the optic nerve head, causing glaucomatous optic neuropathy. Same is with aging. In aging, there is a decrease in the thickness of the choroid, which causes an increase in the resistive index of the retrobulbar vessels, causing a decrease in the ophthalmic and diastolic velocity and decreasing the ocular blood flow. While migraine has also been documented as a risk factor for development, especially in patients with normal tension glaucoma. And it has been seen that migraine causes a decrease in the endothelin and the increase. So in the end, I will just conclude. So besides all these changes, which were earlier thought to correct only the intraocular pressure, now it is important that we should take a look at the ocular blood flow, and we should try to look at treatment aspects which can increase the perfusion pressure in the eye, because it is not the IOP which is to be targeted at, but it is the other ocular risk factors such as ocular blood flow, which is an important factor, so as to prevent further glaucomatous damage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vinita. That was indeed a very wonderful presentation, highlight the anatomy, physiology, and vascular autoregulation. So now I will be talking about ocular blood flow measurement techniques. And are my slides visible?
Yes, ma'am, your slides are visible.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to talk about ocular blood flow measurement techniques, and I'm associate professor at GSVM Medical College, Kanpur. Now, when we see this chart, we do understand that there are a variety of techniques which can be used for blood flow measurement. They can be non-invasive techniques, they can be invasive techniques, and then we have two latest techniques which have come up. Now, when we talk about non-invasive technique, laser is one modality which can be done in the form of laser Doppler velocitometry, laser Doppler flowmetry, and laser speckle technique. Then we have color Doppler imaging, which is widely used technology because machines are widely available at various centers, and it is used for doing color Doppler in carotids also, and therefore we can utilize this machine. So I will be discussing in detail about color Doppler imaging. Then we have other modalities like retinal vessel analyzer, retinal oximetry, blue field entoptic technique, and pulsatile ocular blood flow. Besides this, we have invasive technique in which scanning laser ophthalmoscopic angiography is done with the help of fluorescein dye or ICG dye. And then we have latest of the two technology, which are Doppler Fourier domain OCT and OCT angiography. Now let's talk about color Doppler imaging. As I said, it is widely used technology because being non-invasive and machine being easily available. So what is the principle which is being used? It is an ultrasound technique which uses Doppler shift of the frequency and therefore measures the blood velocity. Now, where the blood flow velocity are measured, as Vinita told very nicely, we measure primarily in the three arteries, which are ophthalmic artery, central retinal artery, and short posterior ciliary arteries. Now, let's locate them on this B-scan photograph. We saw just now in the figure as Dr. Vinita shown it. Now here, first of all, we need to focus this optic nerve head. Like here we can see the optic nerve head. The anterior part of the optic nerve has the central retinal artery, which is imaged as close as possible, as anterior as possible. These two are the location of tuft of short posterior ciliary artery, and ophthalmic artery is seen in association with recti muscle almost 4 millimeter behind the globe. Now here we can see central retinal artery. Now once we image the artery, we apply Doppler flow to it, and then we can, the top of the graph is shown as peak systolic velocity, the top of the graph is shown as end diastolic velocity, and resistivity index is automatically calculated by machine. The best part is that these blood flow velocities are reproducible, and various studies they are there to prove this. Now, whenever we are doing color Doppler imaging, we make the patient to lie supine, and then we apply the ultrasound probe, the Doppler probe, as we do for our B-scan ultrasonography. Now, let's see this small video that how we need to do it. As I said, we need to focus on the optic nerve head like here, and then we put this Doppler window, and we can see the pulsatility of the flow in the anterior part of the central retinal artery. Here is the short posterior ciliary artery, and here is the ophthalmic artery. So one by one, we put, now this is central retinal artery, this is short posterior ciliary artery, and this is ophthalmic artery. It is important to identify these pulsations and put the sample cursor. And as you put, you can see this pulsatile graph coming, and then you can measure with the inbuilt caliper inside the machine. Now here, this is venous flow. So don't get confused. If it is non-pulsatile flow, it is a venous flow. Here we are imaging the ophthalmic artery. It is in close association with some recti muscle. And therefore, you can identify the recti muscle. This is the recti muscle. You need to change the direction of the cursor to perpendicular to the blood flow to get accurate readings. And here you can see so this is method. You can use another radiologist who can use this. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
you are. Yes, you're audible, Shalini.
Okay, fine. So we can ask some of our radiologists to do this, or else what we can do is that we can train ourselves also to do this technology. So these are the various interpretations which can be done on this color Doppler imaging. Sometimes velocity might be absent. Like recently we did in a case of mucormycosis, and here we can see it was very difficult to identify any of the structures. And although we could identify the optic nerve, but still no flow was present. So in occlusive disease, velocity is absent. You can have increased peak systolic velocity where vessels are narrow at the measurement site. So we did our study in our subset of patients of primary open-angle glaucoma, angle closure glaucoma, and controls. And we find that colored ocular blood flow parameters are reduced in the patient of primary open-angle glaucoma, also in PACG, but they were more reduced in the patients of open-angle glaucoma. This is another study which we recently published, the effect of Valsalva maneuver on glaucoma patients, where we found that when Valsalva was being done, there was reduction in peak systolic velocity and end diastolic velocity, and there was increase in resistivity index of the ocular blood flow. Now, we discussed about various pros of the color Doppler imaging, but there are cons which are associated with it. The velocity is detected, but not the actual blood flow because it cannot measure the actual diameter. A trained person is essential to get reproducible reading, which can be done with practice. Now coming to another modality which is available at few of the centers, laser Doppler velocimetry. Now here it is a non-invasive technique which is based on Poiseuille's principle and Doppler effect. Because vessel is eliminated with the help of a coherent laser beam, therefore actual blood flow parameters can be measured. But because it is not available at many of the centers, it is not widely studied technique at our areas. Heidelberg retinal flow meter is another technique which provides mean value of velocity, volume, and flow measurement from a software of 10 into 10 pixel box, but then it is a costly modality and not widely available. Now coming to two of the invasive tests, which are fluorescein angiography and ICG, which is in conjunction with scanning laser ophthalmoscopic technique. They give us arteriovenous pressure time and mean dye velocity. Now, assessment of both the bulk retinal flows can be done, and retinal capillary perfusion can also be assessed by this technology. Now, similarly in ICG, it can also study the choroidal ocular blood flow, which is an important component of ocular blood flow. Now coming to optical coherence tomography and angiography OCTA, which has come up recently and which is a non-contact imaging technique. The best part is that it allows visualization of retinal and choroidal vasculature without the need to inject the dye. And it provides high resolution volumetric blood flow information. Important thing is that it detects the motion of red blood cells as intrinsic contrast and is sensitive to both transverse and axial flow time. Now, when we see the cross-sectional OCTA images, they can superimpose color-coded co-information, and therefore it is color-coded on the grayscale structure information, and therefore we can assess both the things, blood flow and retinal structural information, which can be presented together. Now, what are the advantages? It can be done very quickly. Various layers are imaged of the retina. Detailed evaluation, even in peripapillary area, can be assessed, and it generates quantitative data such as capillary perfusion density. Now, as I said, it is a non-invasive and no dye injection is required, but there are certain disadvantages with it, that it cannot differentiate between tissue loss and ischemia, and does not access vascular leakage as is seen with invasive technology. So there are few limitations of OCTA, and the rest of the things are good about this device. Now let's see how various layers are imaged in Okta. Now the first photograph we can see here is the vitreous angiogram where there is absence of any vascular flow. The second here we can see this is superficial inner retinal angiogram which shows normal retinal circulation, and at the center we can see this foveal avascular zone. Then this is the image which is of deep inner retinal angiogram which shows deep retinal pulses. And this is the outer retinal slab which shows, here we can see choroidal neovascularization. And this is the choriocapillary angiogram, and this is the infrastructural OCT. And here we can see CNV has been very nicely highlighted in this saliency-based approach. And then this is a composite angiogram where we can see this inner retina, which is purple in color. And here we can see choroidal neovascular membrane very nicely highlighted in yellow. So there are various studies on glaucoma. The results of Okta in glaucoma patients says that it can measure optic disc perfusion. It is useful in evaluation of glaucoma progression, and it demonstrates a reduced disc flow index and vessel density in glaucoma. And it also detects reduced optic nerve head blood flow density and is associated with structural and functional glaucomatous damage. So to summarize my talk, I would say there are multiple technologies which are available. Yes, this is the last slide. Thank you. There is no single vascular indicator that can completely evaluate ocular blood flow. Every technique has its own cons and pros, and these technologies are still evolving. But as of now, two modality, which is color Doppler and Okta, which can be utilized for measurement of ocular blood flow in our patients. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
May I request the doctor to invite the next speaker, please?
Yeah, sure. So next, I would be inviting Dr. Murli. As Dr. Kirti said, I can see her. Welcome, Dr. Kirti Singh. Welcome so much. So,
yeah, sorry, I was had some other.
No problem, madam. So we will continue with your presentation.
Sure.
Okay. So we have Dr. Kirti Singh with us, who is heading glaucoma department at GNEC. And as I said previously, she is a prolific speaker and very good teacher, and we are still learning from her. Thank you, Dr. Kirti, for your time and for coming here despite your busy schedule. She will be talking on ocular blood flow and systemic conditions.
Thank you, Dr. Shalini, for having me as part of this wonderful session. And it's very close to my heart because I've been doing ocular blood flow studies the last decade. Although nothing has really come out significantly, but it is definitely the way to go forward. Thank you very much. So without, I'll just start my topic on systemic diseases, which is the what we are actually, we have to remember as ophthalmologists, we are just not looking at the eye. We need to become physicians first and look at the body as a whole. I start my talk with salutations to Dr. Hyre, who way back in 1970 talked about the vascular aspects. For 45 years down the line, he was validated when the ocular blood flow in glaucoma was identified as an independent risk factor for glaucoma progression. Glaucoma is known to have disturbed autoregulation and dysregulation, and glaucoma progression has been linked to reduced ocular perfusion, ocular blood flow, which is OBF. I'll be speaking of OBF now. And the way to measure it is in this short posterior ciliary artery, cingulate artery, and retrobulbar. That is why it's so difficult, because you have to measure it in multiple places. But increased resistive indices have been identified as the most sensitive, and they're linked with faster glaucoma progression. And if it is more than 0.78 in ophthalmic artery, or one key study talked about that it is 6 times the risk of visual field progression. So now what are the systemic conditions affecting OBF, which as we just saw is linked to the glaucoma progression and to glaucoma genesis? The first one is of course hypertension, but please remember it is also hypotension. It's not only hypertension, even hypotension is important. Then we have diabetes, Raynaud's phenomena, migraine, the new buzzword obstructive sleep apnea, hypercoagulable states, And in that, COVID also would come in the picture. We have to still see what the effects of COVID has been, and thyroid problems and systemic medications. So coming to the one which is most studied, hypertension was the key was given by the EMGTS and the CNGTS study, which said that almost 45% and 12% progress despite optimal intraocular pressure control in EMGT and CNTS respectively over 6 and 5 years. Even advanced glaucoma, 1/4 progress despite a very stringent 35% reduction in IOP. So they talked about the ocular blood pressure. These population-based studies gave the evidence. There are multiple studies. Most of them have said that around 4.5 to 3 times risk if your diastolic perfusion pressure falls below 50%. This also has been linked with the antihypertensive treatment. If you lower the systolic and diastolic pressure more, the risk of developing and progressing glaucoma is more. Latino study classified very clearly that even systolic and diastolic pressure both were linked with a reduction in the ocular blood flow as well as increase with the intraocular pressure. And low perfusion pressure was reiterated. However, there were naysayers, and Beijing Eye Study did not find any association of open-angle glaucoma with systolic or diastolic blood pressure or mean BP or ocular perfusion pressure. The Thessaloniki study specifically studied the treatment of antihypertensive treatment on POAG, and they found, although that it was not significant the effect, but most studies have said that diastolic OPP is very significantly related to the patients on using antihypertensive treatment. So how does this work? The nocturnal dip at night happens is usually patients are physiological dippers, which are 2/3 of the healthy individuals, where the systolic BP drops by 12% and diastolic by 17%. The non-dippers, which are 10%, have this dip absent or blunted, and these non-dippers are at the risk of CVS events. Over-dippers have a more than 20% dip, and they're at risk for glaucoma. So what we need clinically is to identify these patients. We need 24-hour ambulatory BP with IOP in diurnal variations. Does treatment change the scenario? Although the study before said no, Thessaloniki study, however, most studies say that hypertension, which is poorly controlled, has a higher risk of glaucoma developing vis-a-vis normotensive. And this again very clearly said poorly controlled hypertension vis-a-vis untreated hypertension and normotensive. The Blue Mountains Eye study identified these aspects. There are shades of gray in this because age. Older people were supposed to work with hypertension had an adverse effect on OAG, whereas younger patient had protective effect. Here the factor of OPP came up because OPP ultimately means blood pressure minus IOP. This happens because with aging, the arteries become stiffer, whereas younger patients have more elastic arteries. So hypertension may be protective. However, most studies say that hypertension is not protective. We have to remember, do we look at the eye alone? Because when we go after IOP, making it lower and lower and BP lower and lower, our blood pressure per se will save the body, but the blood pressure lowering too much and the IOP lowering too much may not save the eye. Second is diabetes. The incidence in diabetes is very high, 36% because of microvascular damage, vascular autoregulation, and retinal ganglion cell injury by the hyperglycemia. Also, at the trabecular meshwork of the fibrinolectin synthesis is much more, and the glaucoma per se becomes more. These were studies where wall to lumen ratio was correlated to duration of diabetes stage and the mean blur rate in open angle glaucoma. So the quantitative studies of end diastolic velocity and peak systemic velocity do show that diabetics have a lower velocities and higher resistive index in the open angle glaucoma. A very recent study, however, said that the Vijaya study in 2014, they said that there is no risk of diabetes with glaucoma. They could not find a risk. Having said that, the population markers were different and the population cohort was different. So the jury is still out on diabetes, but most studies do say it has a higher risk. Next one is vascular dysregulation. where the OPF is not regulated as per tissue needs. This is primary and secondary. Secondary is as per intraepithelial arthritis, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis. The key phenomena here is that endothelial level and vasospasm occurs, and both the glaucoma incidence, glaucoma prevalence, and progression increase. This new entity, which came up around 6 to 7 years, was the primary vascular dysregulation of Flammer syndrome. It is inappropriate vasodilatation. It's an inherited phenomena, usually in slender women, starts at puberty, improves at menopause, so it has some hormonal influence. Cold hands, cold feet, long sleep time, shifted circadian rhythm, nocturnal dips are much more, reduced thirst. So these studies were done on these patients, and they identified actual symptoms and signs which talked about Flammer syndrome. So we need to be more aware of this syndrome, and to be aware that optic disc hemorrhages and optic nerve compartment syndrome is more common in these patients. Since PVD is usually harmless, you treat only when it's disease. There are 3 treatment pillars: lifestyle management, you avoid the triggers of vasospasm; nutrition, where this feeling that you should be excessively lean, especially in girls, you should avoid excessive leanness. And wherever you have a BP very low at night, you take salt and fluid intake to avoid the excessive nocturnal dip. And medication, physiological calcium channel blockers like magnesium have been used. There are few case reports where peripheral vascular disease also have been associated with normotension glaucoma, but they are very few and between. The buzzword nowadays is the OSAS, or the obstructive sleep apnea syndrome. It compromises the optic nerve perfusion, and this is more with the sleep studies coming up, and the snoring and the obesity and the way you sleep and the circadian rhythm, they're all linked by the polysomnography studies. Hypovolemic condition, as I just said, severe blood loss, nocturnal hypotension, and episodes of shock are linked with the non-progressive type of glaucoma, normotensive glaucoma. So in conclusion, there are these systemic diseases have been identified with glaucoma. The way to go ahead is, some studies say don't use carbonic anhydrase inhibitors because they will increase the blood flow and increase OPP and cause vasoprotection is required, which CI will not do. However, the other studies say that topical CI inhibitors would increase the ocular blood flow. Having said that, your choice of anti-glaucoma medication will depend on the diurnal fluctuation of IOP, including the diurnal fluctuation of BP. So have something called as phasing done, where you take the BP and the IOP to see what is the ocular perfusion pressure. You can use any of the drugs as long as the ocular perfusion pressure is 55. The diastolic perfusion pressure is more than 55. Although again, these figures are always dynamic, they keep changing. The new Rho kinase inhibitors and latanoprostenol with a long-term diurnal control will increase the ocular perfusion pressure. This was a study which we published, in which we could find that trabeculectomy reversed the blood flow in asymmetrical glaucoma. So obviously IOP has a big role to play. Last would be that tobacco, which is so common in India, and there are many studies that say smoking itself will reduce the ocular perfusion pressure. So I conclude that today we don't have any special drug which will increase the ocular ocular perfusion pressure, except for lifestyle modifications like walking, exercise, controlling BP, stop smoking, and sleep hygiene. Thank you for a very patient listening.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your wonderful insight in all the types of systemic diseases which are actually affecting the ocular blood flow. And I'm sure viewers must have been benefited by this amazing talk. And with this, as you said that as of now, no drug is actually causing increase in ocular blood flow. And to discuss this very pertinent topic, we have another very prolific speaker who is actually doing lots of work on ocular blood flow and publishing the work also. Dr. Murli is with us from Chennai, and he will be talking about, does ocular blood flow change with glaucoma therapy? Dr. Murli.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chalini. And I think it's wonderful to be in this host of senior glaucoma specialists and people who deal with ocular blood flow. My respects to Professor Das and seniors, Professor Kirti Singh and others. And thanks to AOS for this opportunity to speak here. Does ocular blood flow change with glaucoma therapy? I think we all understand that normal tension glaucoma is an interplay of factors between IOP dependent and IOP independent factors. And the IOP dependent factors would predominate in a patient who has raised intraocular pressure and vice versa, and those the intraocular pressure is statistically normal. So these are pictures of a typical NTG patient, very classic NTG, as you can we all recognize. And my workup on an NTG patient nowadays includes a complete glaucoma evaluation, excludes secondary causes like secondary intermittent angle closure, non-glaucomatous causes for pallor of the disc, and so on. And I would schedule a color Doppler imaging with an experienced radiologist who has been my partner in this for many years now. A physician consult to exclude factors like nocturnal hypertension. I think a lot has been discussed about ocular perfusion pressure and blood pressure and so on. I also include a 24-hour ambulatory BP measurement now, and I would consider a sleep study to exclude OSA, as Professor Kirti Singh pointed out. Various tests to do and determine the ocular blood flow in an eye, the retrobulbar as well as the retinal and choroidal circulation and so on. So many methods, so many flaws and limitations, and despite all these flaws and limitations, we have been continuing to progress with these kind of studies. The most popular, well-published literature data available is on color Doppler imaging. We don't have much data on the other technologies, at least in India. OCT angio has become available, and we are starting to use it, but it's early days. We don't have normative data and so on. So this has been the one which I've been using quite often, and this is in association with a radiologist in Chennai. And the data which you get is on the screen there. You get the readings of the PSV, EDV, and the resistive index from the vasculature at the back of the eye, the ophthalmic artery, the CRA, as well as the veins and so on. And blood flow deficits can be picked up in this vasculature behind the eye very easily with the technology which I have been showing you. I'm going to show you a short video clip of what the initial method of doing the color Doppler imaging. This is in association with Professor Alan Harris, who was with us for some time and who taught us the method of doing the This is Professor Venkat Sai, who's a lead authority on this subject and this technology for the last about 10 years. I think Dr. Chalni did mention about angle correction. I'm just showing you very briefly how the test is being as the patient in supine position. Make sure the patient has taken adequate rest. The blood pressure should be adequately controlled. Patient should have taken medication. Not to apply pressure on the globe. Patient must be relaxed before the test and so on. So many plus and points to be noted. And you notice that even a pillow is not used in many of our patients because the test is sensitive to even the positioning of the head of the patient. Now you can see the probe being placed very gently. It does require a certain amount of skill, and there is a learning curve involved. And it's not everybody who can do the test repeatably every time. This is Professor Harris, who was actually with us and showing us the method. I'm just going to forward that a little bit. That's a reversal of flow in one particular patient we had seen. So yeah, I'll just move on in the interest of time. Some examples of what normal looks like in the ophthalmic artery, the central retinal artery, and the vein, of course, as he was describing. And we recently published a normative data for South India and in our South Indian Tamil Nadu journal about the various values in different age groups of the PSV, EDV, and the RI for different vasculature. This was published very recently in our Tamil Nadu journal. And a few case examples of what can happen when you're doing this kind of, it takes a lot of practice to actually pick up these changes. A loss of biphasic pattern, decreased flow, and abnormal CDA showing loss of the biphasic pattern, the peak systolic velocity blunting, and a sharp peak systolic velocity. So many examples. As you keep doing, you will understand and pick up these changes in patients with different vascular abnormalities. including glaucoma. It's not that you see it only in glaucoma. This is an example of reduced diastolic flow in the PCA, the left side. A recent study which we have published, and in fact in the last AOS, the paper was presented and happened to get the best paper of the session award in 2020. This was a study in which we included and randomized patients to timolol and dorzolamide, and baseline CDA was done. CDA again after 12 weeks, baseline CDA with and without payment, two different drugs. And after say 12 weeks, we look at the CDI. In brief, I can tell you that study results which is yet to be published. And the ophthalmic artery, we did not find any change. In the central retinal artery also, there was no significant change in the resistive index, but a significant change in the resistive index was noted in the short posterior ciliary vessels. Our radiologists actually managed to look at both the temporal and the nasal vessels, and the significant change in the SPCA was actually noted in the temporal vessels. So the RA in brief was not statistically significant with both drugs in the CRA and the OA, but a significant reduction in the resistive index is observed in patients with dorzolamide in the temporal short posterior ciliary vessels. A slight increase in the peak systolic velocity and end diastolic velocity has also been observed. So how does dorzolamide actually do this? The theory of the dorzolamide increasing ocular blood flow is said to be a vasorelaxing effect. Previous studies have pointed out the vasorelaxing effect of the CA inhibitors by extracellular acidosis acting on the pericytes and specifically inhibiting the CA inhibitor enzyme, coenzyme 5, isoenzyme 5. If we look at various publications on the same subject, you will notice that Alan Harris is the authority on the subject, and various other authors as well, and different technologies have been used to look at the blood flow. Many studies have shown an increase in the blood flow in different technologies using with the use of dorzolamide. Some studies have shown no effect. It's either no effect or an increase. And this is the status of the publication using color Doppler imaging as well as other technologies. 72% of the published studies on dorzolamide have documented an increase in the blood flow. This is for the skeptics who believe that the drug doesn't work. Of course, nobody can be very sure of what the meaning of the increased ocular blood flow on glaucoma perfusion, change in perimetry, field loss, and so on. A lot of things are left to speculation. But this is the current data available in published literature. So take-home messages for the practicing clinician: definitely consider ocular blood flow studies or whatever you have access to and whatever you're familiar with in NTG patients. Unexplained progression is a reason for doing the ocular blood flow study. A vascular etiology can be suspected as a cause for glaucoma in many patients. CDA is an established tool with adequate published evidence for ocular blood flow assessment, but definitely has limitations. This is a study group which we started off with, and we are continuing to work with many of them. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mulli. That was indeed a wonderful presentation and gave so many insights. So that was nice that routinely you do ocular blood flow and Doppler study in all NTG patients. Can we have any more indications of this modality as to be incorporated in our clinical practices?
Yeah, I think, basically, it's a difficult test to do in terms of logistics. The problem with I think you didn't mention many of the things related to the color Doppler imaging in our ophthalmic practice. So the machine actually comes now under the PCNDT Act. You're all aware of that, and especially in states like Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu. The machine, the technology, the machine, for you to use it, you have to be a certified radiologist. And if you're an ophthalmologist who's actually doing the test, it's actually illegal. You need to be certified for 6 months and undergo a course, and then only you can start even touching the machine. If you have that machine in your hospital, it means that you must be certified under the PCNDT Act. Your hospital must indicate what are all the patients you're using it for, and all the names and numbers and indication, everything. So it's a big logistic problem as far as ophthalmology is concerned, which is why we refer it to a standalone center. That is one. The second thing is, after certification, the radiologist has to do repeatable tests. We found that suppose one radiologist does it and somebody else is actually his assistant or associate or his colleagues do it, we don't get the same results. It's like our surgical techniques. So I think the same radiologist doing it for the same patient in a follow-up study is extremely important. Otherwise, you don't get the repeatability. So the repeatability and identifying the posterior ciliary vessels is definitely an art and a skill. And if you try it yourself for the first time, you will find you can't even notice it. You won't even note the posterior ciliary vessels. And our radiologist, Professor Venkat Sai, used to do it. he will get it first shot every time. So I think that's a so-called skill and ability of a radiologist to pick up the posterior ciliary vessels. So many things are important as far as the testing is concerned. And with regards to indication of doing the test itself, so we don't refer out everybody for these reasons. We need to send it to a radiologist, we need to send it to a different center, we need to send it to the same radiologist for before and after and so on. With all these logistic difficulties, an increase in the cost, and sometimes patients may turn around and ask you, is this definitely going to change my treatment? Is this going to affect the management? So we don't really have definite answers to all these questions. So we therefore do it selectively. I do it in all NTG patients where we have doubts about the vascularity, progressing despite everything else we do and so on. And of course, in certain diabetics with vascular occlusions, vein occlusions, artery occlusions, wherever you suspect a vascular episode, and you feel the need to look at the retrobulbar blood flow, for those non-glaucoma patients also you can do it.
Thank you so much. And just now we saw that it definitely increases ocular blood flow, and there is so much documented evidence about it. So let's see where we actually can apply this clinically. And for this, we have another very learned and wonderful speaker, Dr. Meenakshi Dhar, with us. She will talk about clinical implications of ocular blood flow in our clinical practices. Dr. Meenakshi.
Thank you, Dr. Shalini, for making me a part of this August gathering. And it's interesting to unravel this Pandora's box, which seems to be getting new and new insight every day. And I've been fortunate, along with Dr. Murli as well, that Dr. Sai had actually come to our place and taught us the radiologists as to how to use the ocular blood flow. And so going on from there to my topic, so much has been said about it that it makes my delivery very easy. And we know that glaucoma does progress in spite of IOP being normal, and that has been quantified by various population studies. We have Dr. Das and other speakers have all told us about how glaucoma is also a type of ischemic optic neuropathy, and an abnormal optic nerve perfusion forms a major role in the pathogenesis of normotensive glaucoma patients. And incidentally, in various populations across our country, 20 to 60% of the POAG patients could be normotensive. Also, it has been substantiated by other studies that lower retrobulbar velocities and higher ocular venous pulsations in patients with glaucoma do occur. So Dr. Kirti has already alluded to, but as far as ocular blood flow is concerned, it's the reduction, it's the fluctuation, instability, as well as the dysregulation that leads to the problem. We know that ocular blood flow decreases in glaucoma. It is the non-IOP related risk factor for progression, and decreased OBF of the optic nerve head is associated with glaucoma progression. This is the CDI being done on the different arteries, and here we take the resistive index as the indirect measurement, because it has been found to be the most reliable parameter, and a value of more than 0.76 has been taken as high. Progression of visual fields correlates with the high RI in both POAG and normotensive glaucoma patients, but not in patients of ankylosing glaucoma. So here we start our discussion with this 80-year-old lady who had been on a 10-year-old follow-up. Her IOPs were never high. Beyond 15, she had a very good compliance. She had a cup asymmetry and a marked visual loss, field loss on the right side. And she, in 2018, we did her register, the ocular blood flow was done, and we found that the RIs were high in all the right eye parameters, and the ocular perfusion pressure was normal. Hence, we started the patient on carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, and a year later, we did actually see an improvement in the visual fields. This she continues to come, was seen last week, this week itself. She happens to be my mother-in-law, incidentally. So we had to stop her ASOP because she developed dermatitis. And now we can again see that there is a worsening of the visual fields. And so I'm starting her on dorzolamide now. So we can see that with similar IOP in the same patients with significantly different RIs, you can see that the advanced visual field defects correlate with high RI. There are lots of different types of mechanisms which control the vascular regulation, and autoregulation is a very important thing. But going beyond this, if we see that the anti-glaucoma medications, as per literature, different medications have increased the ocular blood flow, which includes levobrinolol, vitoxalol, brimonidine, latanoprost, and acetazolamide, apart from the topical CAIs. Also, vitoxalol and cartilol and latanoprost and bimatoprost decrease the resistance of blood vessels. And the acetazolamide and uniproston have anti-endothelial-1 effects. Two drugs that have not had a positive effect on this is, one is that timolol does not affect ocular blood flow, and apraclonidine has a deleterious effect on the retrobulbar circulation. In a nutshell, the prostaglandin analogs, they increase the OPP and they increase the pulsatile ocular blood flow, and hence can improve the blood flow. The carbonionic anhydrase inhibitors do provide vasoprotection, and they improve it by improving the autoregulation by increasing the carbon dioxide available. And the dorzolamide inhibits the carbonic anhydrase isocyanates 4, and this increases the vascularity of the choriocapillaris and the RPE. With this, there is increased carbon dioxide, and this leads to relaxation of choriocapillaris and increases the choroidal blood flow. There are multiple number of studies and meta-analysis which Dr. Murli had also shared, which find that there is, with CAIs, there is increased OBF velocities and reduced vascular resistance. Also, it improves ocular blood flow and delays the visual field progression. It also shortens the AVP time and increase the retrobulbar hemodynamic parameters. In a comparison between dorzolamide and brinzolamide, there are more studies on dorzolamide, but both do increase the blood flow in CRA and short posterior ciliary arteries. And dorzolamide is 6.5 times more affinity for the carbonic anhydrase 4. But the brinzolamide seems to improve retinal blood flow in the peripapillary retina, and it is more efficacious than dorzolamide as per one study. Also, brimonidine enhances blood flow autoregulation in POAG and NTG patients and is gentler to the cornea and maybe have a better compliance. So coming to systemic drugs, which is all there to note is that ocular blood flow is improved with trandropylil, dipyrimidol, ginkgo biloba, and magnesium. What they play in, what role they play is yet to be seen. We conducted this study in glaucoma patients with open angles, and incidentally, this had won an award for the best poster in 2019. We included patients at the AIOC. Patients with 4 or more visual fields were included, and they were divided into patients with no visual field progression and those with visual field progression. OBF parameters were calculated for each patient. Visual field progressors with normal IOP showing high RI on OBF were put on topical carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, either dorzolamide TDS or brinzolamide, and they were followed up for a minimum of 6 months to see if progression halted. It was also done, and correlation between the two was found. Our results showed more than 50% patients had high resistive index, and there was visual field progression seen. 4 eyes with normal IOP on topical CAIs not only halted VF progression, but showed improvement. This is one such case who is a one-eyed patient, and he showed improvement. Another patient with asymmetric cupping and asymmetric involvement had higher RIs in the eye, which had more progression. And this is another patient. So Flemmer syndrome, Dr. Kirti has already alluded to. I would like to say that POAG is associated with an alteration in factors related to OBF and a breakdown of autoregulation. And when progression occurs in spite of controlled IOP, vascular factors should be emphasized upon. We should do a Doppler, and if RI is high, treatment should be modified to include the CAIs. Because increase in OPP has the potential, half a minute, glaucoma medication should also be evaluated on the ability to increase OPP and blood flow. To summarize, OBF and OPP have a role in etiopathogenesis and progression of glaucoma. OBF is reduced in all the retrobulbar, ONH, and choroidal circulations. Vascular deficits may be one of the first manifestations of glaucoma, in fact. And although conceptually well established, we need to do a lot more. And in future, maybe we'll have our normative database like Dr. Bulli has provided, and we may get new modifiable risk factors. And maybe things like even statins may improve not only other parts of systemic improvement, but may improve endothelial cell dysfunction and may be useful in glaucoma. Decreased OBF may be both the cause and the result of glaucoma, glaucomatous optic neuropathy, and it is yet to be seen. Thank you so much for patient hearing.
Thank you so much for giving such wonderful cases where we actually can see the effect of drugs on ocular blood flow. And that means we are positive about the increase in ocular blood flow and subsequent, its effect on subsequent functional improvement. That is what actually needs to be documented nicely before we can move on to results of these drugs which include or which increase the ocular blood flow. And then if they can improve the fields also, then probably that will be more properly utilized in our clinical scenarios. Nowadays, we also have Rho kinase inhibitors which have come up and are being used regularly, and they are found to be having some beneficial effect. Madam, what is your opinion about these drugs?
For me, I feel it's too premature to reflect on their effect on ocular blood flow. Maybe in some years to come by, I'll be able to reflect on that. But like what Dr. Murli was saying about the limitation of having a radiologist, we were lucky to be, since I was at Amrita, where we could give the whole, give a PG a thesis, a radiology thesis. So we could do all these studies. So people who are like you and Dr. Kirti can actually take this forward and continue to do it.
Thank you so much, madam. Anybody else would like to comment? Dr. J.C. Das, sir? Dr. Murli,
I have a comment,
Yeah.
With regards to the use of OCT angio, I think I'm sure many of us are using it and exploring the various options in glaucoma patients. We are still actually, it's like the elephant and the blind man. Now, literally, we are looking all around the OCT angio. We're yet to find out what is the actual feature which is going to help us in the diagnosis and management. I think we've been looking at the OCT angio for almost a year and a half. I still am yet to come to any conclusion as to where I can actually use the OCT angio either in the diagnosis or the management. And to charge the patient or not is a bigger dilemma because it becomes more expensive tests over and above our applanation, gonio, disc photos, fields, and OCT, and now the OCT angio. So the problem with the OCT angio is that we have the problem of the chicken and the egg phenomenon, in which came first. Did the RGC loss come first and the ischemia is showing up later, or the ischemia is coming in later, which is picked up on the OCT angio, and the RGC loss is showing up later? Maybe I request Professor Das with his experience and Professor Kirti Singh to comment on the OCT angio and the new phenomenon of, it comes into the ophthalmologist's purview. So maybe we're going to see more of the OCT angio in terms of circulatory changes and maybe in glaucoma management than the color Doppler imaging, which seems to be dying a natural death.
And Dr. Murli, in fact, the OCT angio is just a modality which is coming. And they're coming out with a newer software to measure the blood flow in all the layers of retina. And it is still very much premature to comment whether it will be useful in our glaucoma day-to-day practice or not. I think with the newer software they're coming out with, I think they claim that we'll have more solid information and data so that we can apply it to the daily practice. Till such time we have to wait. The newer modality seems very promising, but we have to wait and watch.
That's my take home points. I do see a lot of our youngsters getting excited about the OCT angio and coming in and sending me reports and referrals of patients with OCT angio reports saying convinced that this is glaucoma, this is NTG and so on. I think it's early days and we really have to balance between technology versus what is available evidence before we offer something unproven to the patient.
I think Dr.
Yeah.
Murthy, again, I agree with that. Every machine has a honeymoon phase and it's going through that. But as with OCT per se, we have so many red disease and green disease phenomena happening, and just one red mark will label the patient as glaucoma. OCT angio is still has a lot of way to go. Having said that, if you can follow up like what Meenakshi did, if you can follow up the patient on the same machine over 3 to 4 years, then you can say it's not the chicken and not the egg, but which came first. Because if you can prove that the same patient on the same machine had these parameters in 2021 and 2024, it has changed, then we may come to some conclusion, and I'm sure people are working on it. Machines change so fast. I mean, their lifespan is within 2 to 3 years. By the time you have a data on one machine, they change the machine with the upgrade version. So this may not be really possible. Ultimately, we have to go back to our clinical evidence, what the patient is feeling, how the patient's vision is, and we have to look at the nuance of vision. The 6/9 vision may not come back to 6/5 or 6/12 will not come back to 6/5, but the nuances, the mobility of the patient, the navigation, the contrast, that small clues may tell us that the ocular perfusion pressure is improving and the drug or the treatment is working. Because all machines ultimately are as good as you read them, and all machines are as good as much they impact the patient's life.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Professor Kirti.
I think Dr. Saigal's presentation is pending, right, ma'am?
Yeah. So we will be having Dr. Vineet Saigal. He will be telling us case-based scenarios with regards to ocular blood flow. Dr. Vineet.
Thank you,
Start
ma'am.
sharing, sir.
Is the share screen option coming?
Sir, you need to switch on your presentation, run your presentation first, and then share screen will be coming. You had shared earlier also, right, sir?
Now it is coming, sir.
Yes, sir. You can start your presentation.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Loud and clear, sir.
So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Myself, Dr. Vineet Saigal, would be presenting you few of the cases. Before I start the cases, where the OBF have a role in my practice. So I do this OBF not only for the glaucoma patients, we do this study for ocular ischemic syndrome as well. And any patient who is coming with the vascular occlusion, there also we can have some OBF as a role. Now, what are various techniques? We have just, Dr. Meenakshi, Dr. Murli have given us a lot of insight about all the techniques here. What is the basic advantage of the color Doppler imaging? It is a non-invasive method. And the principle of operation is it basically have the ultrasound guided, non-invasive blood flow velocity technique. What we measure, ma'am has told us, we measure ophthalmic artery, central retinal artery, and the various indices that we have. I won't basically go into the details. Basically, we measure the peak systolic velocity and diastolic velocity and the resistive index. Now, as you can see, I'm very much fortunate that my better half, Dr. Achal, she's a radiologist and she has been trained under Dr. Venkat Sai and Dr. Elon Harris also. So she is doing the ocular blood flow studies for me. And we are doing this as Dr. Venkat Sai has trained us. We are doing this in one of our patients. So we use basically a same Doppler machine with the probe, which is 10 millihertz, 7 to 10 millihertz, and it is placed on the closed eyelid. And then we get the graphs. And this is like the graph which we can see with the central retinal artery. So similar type of graphs are seen in the short posterior ciliary arteries. And we basically, it is a very, very important that the same as Dr. Murli have told us, that the same radiologist is doing the follow-up for the patient, doing the test and doing it repeatedly once again and again. Now, what is our experience? We have a OPD of around 25,000 patients per month. Around 2,000 patients are primary, secondary, mixed glaucoma. We have around 14 centers all over the India, and we are basically equipped with each and every modality that you want for the management of the glaucoma. So where this modality fits into my clinical practice, being a clinical practice, being a practitioner in a private corporate hospital. So the patient profile who are diabetic, hypertensive, post-vitreoretinal surgery, pre-existing coronary artery disease, vasculopathies. So these patients, if they are having glaucoma, what I used to do was, I used to do only diurnal variation with BP charting. So as you can see that we are doing a 24-hour BP charting, we are seeing that are there any nighttime dips here? We also used to do a diurnal variation from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. and we basically correlated it with the blood pressure monitoring. So now we have this modality with us. So the indication for OBF analysis for me is unexplained progression of visual field defects even on the target IOP, normal tensive glaucoma, patients who are having a vascular occlusion or ocular ischemic syndrome, and also right now we wanted to learn about this modality. So a lot of normative data I wanted to collect from this OBF analysis. So you can see in one of the patient, the OBF is going on, the OBF study. So I am very fortunate that Dr. Aanchal is with me and she is doing all these OBF studies. And because of the lockdown, we were not able to follow up the patients for last 6 months to 1 year, but maybe the things now are better. We would be doing more of the OBF studies. So as you can see, the OBF study is going on, and this is the type of report that we give to the patient, where, as Dr. Murli have told us, we give all the in the ophthalmic arteries, CRAs and the SPAs, we do share the PSVs, the end diastolic velocities and the resistive index. So what is my experience? We have done around 30 cases from all the variety of patients. I just want to share 2 of the cases with me, with all of you. These are the first patient was a 74-year-old male. He was a pseudophakic. He was complaining of blurring of vision in the left eye, and there was a small pale disc. It was not looking like a glaucomatous disc, but the patient says that, sir, I'm repeatedly having attacks of blurring of vision. Anyways, we went ahead with the OBF analysis, and if you can see here, the waveforms, the abnormal waveforms, if you can appreciate here. I'm just highlighting it. If you can see here, so there are some abnormal waveforms which we are getting. So I got a call from Dr. Aanchal, and then we went ahead with the carotid Doppler also. So see, from the ocular Doppler, we got some hint that there is something abnormal going on, and we went ahead with the patient with a carotid Doppler also, and we saw that there is a 100% blockage. Now this was not detected earlier. So what the color Doppler imaging have told me, that from some hint that I was getting from the OBF analysis, I was able to detect something which is more serious, more related to the mortality of the patient that we can detect. So that's why it's very important that not only the OBF analysis has to be seen only in terms of glaucoma, it should be basically there as a hint towards any major vascular problem the patient may be having also. So the case 2 I would be sharing here, he was a 64-year-old male. He was basically having, she was having a 6/6 parts vision in both eyes. The baseline IOP was 26. She was started on the latanoprost earlier, and now the pressures were controlled. And on examination, everything seems to be nice. There was no frank neuroretinal dim defect, but when I saw the visual field, it was having a very heavy defects in the left eye. You can see the arcuate scotomas. So I was not very clear that why this has happened. When I saw the optic nerve was not so bad. We went ahead with the ocular Doppler studies, and it also have not given us much of the idea that why this is happening. The peak systolic velocity of the ophthalmic artery was much higher. So I thought that this cannot be because of the glaucoma. So what we saw was that we sent the patient for the cardiological evaluation, and we saw the patient was suffering from an RHD. So I went back to see the patient, and I saw the optic nerve, everything. And then I saw some kinking of the vessels and some occlusion in the inferior part. So it was an inferior BRAO, which I have missed, which might have caused this effect. So from these 2 cases, I want to just highlight that it is not just the ophthalmologist who is basically getting some hints. It is we have to basically see it as a whole disease, where the cardiologist may also have a role in the treatment as well as in the management of the patient. So what is my carry home message? It is a new technique, standardization of the technique and interpretation has to be going on. We can get some clinical clues for the treatment of the vascular ocular pathology, and simultaneously at the site of interest and role of OBF in increasing the drugs can be explored in the future. So the results that we have seen, so it is almost the same that Dr. Murli have shared us. Only thing is that in the cases that I have basically collected, the peak systolic velocity of the posterior ciliary arteries, the short posterior ciliary arteries, it is a bit more. So we are getting it around 14.16 to 13.21, but mine is a very small sample of 30 patients, and we are not able to get a follow-up because of the issues which we are facing of the lockdown and the decreased mobility of the patient. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vineet. That was very a nice presentation and highlighting the other aspects of color Doppler in our ophthalmic patients. So what would you say that when we should actually go for a color Doppler of carotids in such a scenario? What patients, what are the real indications?
I think that any patient who is undergoing a ocular Doppler should go with the carotid Doppler also, because it is the ophthalmic artery, and the ophthalmic artery, the branches are from the ophthalmic artery. So we have to see if the ophthalmic artery is getting enough blood or not. If there is a ICS stenosis of 90%, as we have seen in one of my patients, so then everything would be less. So I think that the total scenarios that we have to see the blood pressures and everything. With that, if you are doing, and it is the same probe, so we are doing it on the same machine, why not to go with the carotid Doppler and the ocular Doppler in the same setting?
We had an interesting problem with this same thing which you mentioned. Actually, the first few patients, we were doing both the ocular as well as the carotid Dopplers for all patients, and we were quite excited because the carotid shows us wonderful waveforms. You get lovely PSVs and EDVs and all that. It's very exciting to see that. When you put it on the eye, you don't get the same waveforms. But a few patients actually objected. They said that, why are you looking at my neck when the problem is in the eye? So then we had difficulty in getting consent from the patient, saying that you must get specific consent. The radiologist said you must get a consent for doing the carotid as well as the ocular blood flow. So from then on, it becomes more complex. And then the radiology center turned around and said, we have to charge them for that as well. So now it becomes even more complex. So I think for you to say you will do the carotids, you have to charge them. You have to get a consent that you're going to look at the neck as well. And then, of course, the eye. So, and a very brief point. You have a wife as a radiologist. So I think you can do any other radiology and Doppler wherever else you want. You can probably look at the femoral artery also.
This is a practical problem. Yeah, but also when you were
not all of us are married to radiologists.
Peak systolic velocities, they found actually more, there was more variability of PSVs from operator to operator. So I think it is more important that we rely on the RI rather than anything else.
Absolutely. I think RI is the most important thing, like how we look at progression also.
The same thing. What was the RI findings for you, Vineet? You shared the PSV findings. I would agree with that. The RI findings are because it's
RI findings in our, whatever the cases we have done, it is getting more variability in the RI findings.
Okay. Because RI is the more consistent one and the more predictable one for ocular.
Yeah, and more reproducible. So I think maybe it will be interesting to relook at your data and then share it with us.
One more quick point, I think, where Google comes in. I think your Vineet was mentioning about looking at the fundus photograph and then looking at the cardiology and so on. I think Google has overtaken all of us. A fundus photograph